Also, really honored to be here, Mark, and have this opportunity. I thank you very much for the invitation and having me here today. So the first thing I want to do was just give you the title of my thesis. It's a study of climate change resilience, conservation easements, and the protection of biodiversity in the eastern U.S., Great Lakes, and northern Great Plains regions. And the title really reflects what the purpose of my thesis was, is to investigate ways to improve the protection of biodiversity through the efficient use of conservation easements and climate change resilience. I just want to define a couple of terms. Climate change resilience refers to the capacity of a site to maintain species diversity and ecological function as the climate changes. And a conservation easement is a perpetual legal agreement in the form of a deed that restricts certain land uses in an effort to protect defined conservation interests. And a defined conservation interest could be wildlife habitat, protecting water quality, even productive farmland. Scenic vistas can be protected through a conservation easement. So there's a number of things that can be used to implement this. Next, I wanted to highlight just some key points that inspired my research and really excited me about doing this project. Countless studies have shown that climate change is having a detrimental impact on the diversity of plants and animals on a global scale. Species diversity and functioning ecosystems are essential to support food production and the availability of clean water. For decades now, researchers have known that specific natural landscape features are correlated with greater levels of biodiversity and demonstrate resistance to the negative impacts of climate change. Conservation easements have long been a popular tool for preserving land, protecting conservation interests. They offer both tax benefits and environmental protections that can be enforced indefinitely. The economics of land conservation, such as the cost of land or the expense of long-term property management and monitoring, can have a large impact on the success of conservation easements. So climate change resilience offers a scientifically proven method of preserving species diversity and ecological function, excuse me, while also helping organizations sustain their investments in protecting the environment. So my preliminary research indicated that conservation organizations may be underutilizing the benefits of climate change resilience. And if this was true, it would represent an excellent opportunity to improve biodiversity protection and lower organizational risk. So to better understand the use of resilience in existing easements and estimate the economic impacts to conservation organizations, I developed 3 research questions to guide the investigation, shown there in yellow at the bottom of the slide. But to stay within my allotted time, Mark, I'm going to try to focus on the first one. Is there evidence that conservation organizations are using climate change resilience to protect biodiversity? And to objectively explore this and the other questions, I just want to talk a little bit about the methods and procedures I developed to do that. First, I built a database of conservation easements to serve as a study population. I selected 104 easements located throughout the eastern United States, shown here. The red and blue dots represent one of each of the easements. And I recorded information about their size, their conservation objectives, and factors that helped reduce unintended bias in the sample population. I used GIS analysis to calculate total resilience in each partial by measuring several metrics known to define resilient areas. And I want to mention here that the techniques to measure climate change resilience are the result of an extraordinary work by a team of researchers led by Mark Anderson, Director of Conservation Science at the Nature Conservancy. And I found this work fascinating, and I think melded into it. So each of the research questions were ultimately developed into testable hypotheses. T-test and regression analysis were conducted to produce evidence that would hopefully answer the research questions. So let me tell you about my results of hypothesis one. I look for evidence that conservation organizations are incorporating landscape diversity, which is a key element of climate change resilience, into the reasons. To do that, I compared mean diversity scores from two distinct groups. Group 1 contained easements with explicit directives for preserving biodiversity. Group 2 contained an equal number of easements with no commitments at all to preserving biodiversity. T-testing revealed no statistical difference in diversity scores between these two groups. So, for me, that result was a little bit surprising. I've studied this for quite a while now, and it is clear that the benefits to biodiversity from resilient land preservation are well established, and they're based on solid science. So you might expect that evidence of resilience would be detectable, especially in easements dedicated to preserving biodiversity. But even though the results were surprising to me, my investigation actually discovered rationale that fits with the findings. First, despite the fact that links between resilient landscapes and biodiversity are well known within the scientific community, I discovered that many medium to small land trust organizations are unaware of this research. I proposed through my thesis to increase outreach to conservation organizations all across the country to help them become more familiar with the environmental and financial benefits of resilient land preservation. Second, landowners and organizations sometimes avoid broad-based biodiversity protection because of the potential for higher land management costs and the possibility of being unable to meet contractual protection obligations as environments are transformed through climate change. I proposed increasing third-party partnerships to help reduce land management burdens on donors and land trusts, and to open opportunities for other conservation organizations to contribute to environmental protections. And third, tax incentives motivate many owners to establish easements. However, the additional value and possible burden of long-term biodiversity protection are not recognized in the current tax code. So I propose strengthening both federal and state tax incentives to encourage investments into high-quality, climate change resilient landscapes. And that should be 8 minutes.
All right, so Bob, excellent work in illuminating a couple of different questions. And the one that comes to my mind, and it's from my own just anecdotal experience of speaking to people around climate change, is just in general there's a lack of awareness, or let alone to this next level of climate change and resilience. Yeah. And to some extent, for efforts related to conservation, my perception is that people, once they get into whether it be donating or in the space of conservation, it's a kind of a long-term thought. It's a long-range perspective of things, and in some ways that is resonant with what climate change is. It's a long-moving, slow-moving, but eventual, at this point, something that we're going to have to deal with. And it just hard for me to articulate the exact question, but just like that, there seems to be just this disconnect of the present, if you will, urgency of climate change, the more recent, if you will, science that is shifting and saying that things are accelerating. Things are going to happen sooner than we thought, sooner than 3 or 4 generations from now, but within a generation we're going to see some truly dramatic changes that will lead to resiliency as a more urgent problem.
I found the exact same thing, and I did find some rationale behind that too. The Land Trust Alliance, as a matter of fact, has quite a bit of documentation about how the land trust should approach landowners regarding climate change. It is an extremely delicate subject. I don't want to be going to political motivations of different people. The cause of climate change is in dispute by some people. And those people are well represented as donors of land. So the Land Trust Alliance surprisingly cautions land trusts from pushing this point about the cause of climate change. It's right back to your point. You can talk about it around the edges. And I think if you study the subject, we don't want to talk about around the edges. We want to hit it head on because it's urgent. But the land trust community cannot speak of it in those terms. They're very light on it. And then, as I mentioned in my paper, there is some concern over if you want to protect a broad range of biodiversity on a piece of property, and the climate changes and alters the environment there, you could be facing some problems because you're contractually obligated to protect that biodiversity. And if you had some sort of a cascade effect where it began to fall, that your easement could be in legal jeopardy. And that is something that is also a fear of the land trust community, because as it stands right now, the perpetual nature of land or conservation easements has largely been upheld. And there are people out there attempting to overturn these easements because they see a larger market value for that. So I found evidence of that, exactly what you were talking about, and some rationale about why that might be happening.
One question, Mel, go ahead.
I'm interested to know these small land trusts. Do you think that what they're most interested in is that connection to land?
Absolutely.
So it's not about biodiversity, it's about their connection to that place.
I think a lot of them are interested in not necessarily biodiversity, but preservation of the land. Preservation of our environment, and agree in how their family has used that land. So, but the issue of biodiversity is a more specific thing, it's something that was a focus of mine, and you really have to see that as why is biodiversity under threat, and that often brings you to have to talk about climate change in a more blunt way. And I think we're moving in that direction, but it's very slow. I'm an innovation person. I'd like to get on it.
Thanks so much.
Okay.